A 3-year-old girl kept signaling for help, but no one noticed except for a former soldier. A few minutes later, he stood up, and what he did next left everyone speechless. What chilling danger lay hidden in plain sight, and what shocking truth would Ethan uncover that day? Ethan Walker, a man whose body seemed to remember the rigid discipline of military life even out of uniform, found himself in a quiet Kansas diner. The afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, and the only sounds were the faint buzz of a trapped fly and the clatter of an old HVAC unit. Ethan wasn't hungry, but ordered coffee and a sandwich, his thank you barely a whisper, as if he feared the past might hear. He'd left Kansas years ago after a tragic accident stole his parents, leaving a 17-year-old boy with an empty house and a single thought: staying would drive him crazy. People say time heals, but soldiers just learn to keep a wound quiet enough to keep moving. He watched the other patrons, an elderly couple, a playful little boy named Leo. Then he saw her. In a corner near a brittle cactus sat a tiny girl, 3 or maybe 4, in a pale blue dress. She was unnervingly still, her gaze drifting across the room, brushing every face just long enough to see but not long enough to be noticed. She was looking for someone who could read what she couldn't say. Across from her, a man in a gray suit with pale blue eyes was buried in a thick, untitled book. This was what caught Ethan's attention. Nobody takes a 3-year-old out to eat and ignores them. Nobody. Ethan slowly turned his coffee cup, his finger tracing its warmth. He didn't need to look at the girl again. He knew she'd glance his way, and she did, her eyes lingering, a slight tremble in them. Margaret, the diner owner, brought his sandwich, her eyes squinting just a little, as if she too sensed the unsettling stillness in the air. Leo ran past, nearly bumping the girl's chair. She flinched, but made no sound. The man across from her merely glanced up, but it was enough to stop Leo dead in his tracks. Ethan looked outside. A dark gray SUV, engine running, sat in the mostly empty parking lot. It had a superhero sticker on the rear window, not the kind kids loved, but the kind used to block a view. He stood, walked his cup to the sink behind the counter, and spoke low to Margaret. "That little girl in the corner. You noticed anything?" Margaret, a mother herself, quickly confirmed it. Lily had been there a while, silent, unmoving, and Margaret had heard faint cries once or twice. Ethan nodded, returning to his table, facing the girl more directly, and then she looked at him directly this time. Her right hand lifted slowly. She curled it into a fist, then opened it once, twice, 3 times, not dramatic but not hidden either. A silent, universal signal, SOS, no more doubt. When his gaze locked with Lily's, young Leo accidentally dropped his toy car, which rolled to a stop at the feet of the man in the gray suit. The man looked up, not at Ethan, not at Leo, but at the girl. His eyes were cold. He said nothing, didn't raise his voice. Just one look, sharp and still, was enough to make the girl pull her hand back, hurriedly placing it in her lap. Ethan pressed his fingernails hard into his palm until it turned white. The air inside the diner, quiet already, began to boil. The girl had given a signal, and the old soldier knew he couldn't walk away from this place like some passing traveler anymore. Ethan stood and walked to Cole's table. "Excuse me, hope I'm not interrupting." Cole looked up, a strained smile on his lips, eyes cold. "What do you want?" Ethan asked calmly. "Is the girl your niece?" Cole hesitated. "She's my daughter. Is there a problem?" Ethan feigned casualness. No, just she reminds me of my little cousin. Got curious, that's all." Cole gave a faint nod, but the gesture was too perfect, too programmed. Lily glanced at Ethan, and her hand moved slightly, palm tightening into a fist, then releasing. Once, twice, 3 times. This time it was slow, deliberate, no room for doubt. Ethan, as if an idea just struck him, pulled out a peppermint candy. "My niece used to love these. Wonder if the little one might too. How about giving her a candy? Strawberry, kids usually go for that." He extended his hand towards Lily. The girl looked up, eyes flickering, to Cole, then back to the candy. After a brief hesitation, her tiny fingers trembled as they reached for the edge of the wrapper. The swat came quick. Cole didn't say a word. He swept his hand across the table, striking Lily's wrist, not hard enough to make a loud sound, but just enough force to make that little arm recoil as if burned. "She's allergic. Don't give her anything without asking." His voice was sharp. He stood up straight, put the candy back in his shirt pocket, and looked at Lily slowly, deliberately. She didn't cry, but her hands pulled back, curling around the hem of her shirt, gripping tight. An unconscious defensive reflex. Her small shoulders quivered, her eyes lowered, not just in fear, but from a trust that had just cracked. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Cole gave a slight nod, like slamming a door shut. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a firm, silent signal. The conversation was over. Ethan walked back to his table, each step heavier than the last. The air in the diner had turned thick. Margaret looked over, her brow furrowed. Ethan sat down, let out a quiet breath, then spoke, loud enough for Margaret to hear. Call the police, the sooner the better. Margaret froze for a moment, then gave a small nod. Lily still sat upright, like a piece of furniture set in the wrong place. Ethan stood again, walking toward Margaret at the counter. He placed both hands on the hard wood, no sound. He bowed his head slightly, voice low. "I've confirmed it." The girl signaled again. It wasn't a mistake. Margaret turned to him, her eyes heavy. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice raspy. Ethan nodded, eyes steady. "I'm a Marine. I've seen combat." That was a distress signal used when a victim can't speak. Short, clear, 3 times, just like the manual says. Margaret looked at Cole's table, at the unmoving Lily. She watched for a few more seconds, then turned back, speaking very slowly. "If I call the police and I'm wrong, can I be sued?" Ethan's answer was chilling. "Possibly, but if you don't call and I'm right, a child might be taken out of the U.S. tonight." Margaret let out a sigh. The hesitation was gone. She nodded a small, heavy nod. "Follow me." She led Ethan behind the counter, through a wooden door into a narrow, damp, soundproof break room. Margaret took out her phone and dialed. "Rachel Monroe, Sheriff." She lifted the phone. "Rachel, it's me, Margaret. Cafe at rest stop number 8. I've got an emergency." Rachel on the other end was calm. "Is anyone hurt?" "Not yet, but there's a little girl about 3. She's with a strange man, not eating, not talking, no touch." And Margaret glanced at Ethan. "Someone here confirms she's signaling for help." A pause. "Who confirms it?" Rachel asked. Ethan took the phone. "My name, Ethan Walker, former Marine. I'm trained to identify nonverbal SOS signals. The girl has signaled twice very clearly. The man hasn't been violent, but he's in complete control." Rachel's voice changed, focused now. "I need the location and a description. Do you have a license plate?" "Gray SUV out front. Rear window has a sun shade with a superhero sticker." "Kansas plates, but I didn't catch the full number." The man's white, blonde hair, gray suit. The girl, light brown skin, pale blue dress, around 3 years old, curly hair. Rachel replied, "I'm sending units now. Don't let them leave. I'll handle the rest." Click. The call ended. Margaret leaned against the stainless steel shelf, her back trembling slightly. "I didn't think I'd be doing this today." "Neither did I, but I'm glad you did." At the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, Officer Tommy Reyes grumbled about another false alarm as he put on his jacket. But his chief's words were sharp. "The witness is a former Marine, specially trained. This isn't one of those 'I heard a strange cry' situations." "Go, Tommy." Back at the diner, Ethan and Margaret stepped out. No one had any idea what had just transpired. Cole was still sitting, but his eyes flicked toward the counter, clearly more alert. He swept the room with just his eyes, the kind of tell only someone expecting to be followed would show. Lily still sat upright, but from behind the counter, Ethan noticed her glancing out the front window like she was waiting for something. The diner was nearly empty. A chill draft made the curtains flutter like a weary breath. Ethan sat still, every sense drawn taut like a bowstring. Lily's eyes flickered toward him every so often. Cole remained controlled, rigid, cold. Then the door latch clicked. It wasn't loud, but it sliced through the hush like a blade. As the door cracked open, Cole shot to his feet, shoving the chair back abruptly. He grabbed Lily's wrist with enough force to leave her skin tinged red. "Let's go," he said quietly, in order. Lily gave a slight jerk, her small feet moving reluctantly. She didn't scream, didn't struggle, but her face showed pure alarm. She looked back, her eyes sweeping across Ethan's table, that same pleading look, only now sharper, more urgent. Ethan slid his coffee cup aside and stood, not in a rush, but every step had purpose, moving directly to block Cole's path to the door. The two men faced each other, the air between them pulled so tight it felt like it might snap. "Where do you think you're taking her?" Ethan's voice was low, steady, impossible to ignore. Cole raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a strained smile. "I told you we're heading back to Iowa. It's late. You're not planning on getting in my way, are you?" Lily lowered her head, her eyes fixed on Ethan, her small hands clutching her shirt, trembling. Ethan didn't move. "She doesn't want to go with you," he said. "I've called the police. They'll be here soon. If you leave now, it'll look suspicious." "Things will go worse for you." Cole let out a short, scornful laugh. Over a piece of candy, a glance. "Who do you think you're butting into someone else's business?" "I'm not sure who I am," Ethan replied. "But I know she didn't go with you willingly. She gave a distress signal twice. I saw it. I've been trained to recognize those signs." Cole frowned, shifting his stance. He pulled Lily closer, his grip tightening, making her whimper. "You're accusing me in public. I could sue you for interference with personal liberty." Ethan stepped forward just half a step, blocking the way completely. "The police will sort that out. Until they arrive, I'm not letting you leave with her." Cole's eyes narrowed, then without warning, he thrust his arm out as if to shove Ethan aside. But Ethan had been in combat. His reflexes were sharp, steady. He didn't back off or block, just angled his body slightly, maintaining his stance. "Step aside," Cole growled, his eyes bloodshot, breath turning ragged. Ethan said nothing, his gaze quiet, cold as tempered steel. Cole was losing patience. He yanked Lily toward the door, but she resisted, bracing her feet against the floor. He jerked her again, rougher this time. For a split second, his other hand drew back as if ready to strike, but Ethan caught his wrist in midair, gripping it firmly. "That's enough." Ethan's voice was low but carried weight. Cole struggled, trying to pull free. The two men stood nearly chest to chest, tension wound tight like a coiled spring. Cole made another attempt to shove Ethan, but Ethan didn't budge, feet planted like bedrock. Lily backed away, shaking, her hands clutched her coat, eyes wide open. "You'll regret this," Cole hissed, his voice low like a curse. Ethan still said nothing. He looked Cole straight in the eye, unwavering. Then he bent slightly, his gaze softening as he turned to Lily. "You don't have to go anywhere, you're safe here." Lily didn't move, perfectly still, as if waiting for something to end the way she hadn't dared hope it would. No one had time for more words. A siren wailed in the distance. Headlights flickered across the floor through the front window, blue, red, blue, red. A police SUV rolled to a stop outside the cafe. The lights slowed, the engine cut off, a car door opened. Tommy Briggs stepped out first, followed by Rachel Monroe, the police chief. Cole yanked Lily's hand, trying to pull her away faster. But he had barely pivoted halfway when Ethan took another step forward, planting himself squarely in front of the door. His broad soldier's back stood like a wall. "Stop right there," Rachel signaled, her voice clear, firm. Tommy stepped in closer, his hand extended in a gesture of peace. "We just need a few minutes. Don't make this more complicated than it has to be." Cole hesitated. He turned to Ethan, eyes burning with fury, his lips just enough to mouth. "You're going to regret this." Ethan said nothing. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, his eyes meeting Lily's. He gave her a small nod, slow, silent, like a promise. Lily didn't say anything, but she let go of Cole's sleeve and stepped back, just one step, but enough for everyone to see. Tommy bent down, whispered something gently to Lily, then held out his hand. She stared at it for a few seconds, then took it. She didn't cry, but in her eyes was a light, faint but unmistakable, the kind only survivors carry. Trust, even if fragile. Cole was separated from the girl and taken outside. Rachel kept her eyes on him until he disappeared behind the car door. Inside, Margaret's diner had gone completely still. Ethan walked back to his table and sat down. His whole body seemed to loosen like a man coming off a chase no one had run. Margaret stepped out from behind the counter. She set a glass of water in front of him. "I never thought I'd do something like that, but today seems like a day to do the right thing." Ethan took the glass, looking at the soft mist clinging to the rim. He didn't drink, just laid his hand flat on the table as if confirming that a new chapter had just begun. "The thing is, doing the right thing doesn't always come at the right time." Margaret let out a long breath. She sat down on the stool behind the counter and looked out the front window where the red and blue lights of the police cruiser still flickered across the wet asphalt. "But today, at least, we didn't lose the trail." Outside, the wind still blew, but this time it didn't feel quite so cold. Overhead, wispy clouds drifted quietly. The police had turned off their lights. Cole was led to cruiser number 402, handcuffed, head lowered. He didn't resist, didn't shout. He just quietly turned his head toward his SUV as if trying to memorize the direction. He never got the chance to run. Tommy glanced at his phone. His eyes flickered when he saw an urgent alert from federal headquarters. 2 men from Cole's group were stopped at the southern border. Texas police confirmed they were waiting for Cole, possible accomplices. All 3 are suspected of being involved in a child trafficking ring. Rachel gave a slight nod, her hand tightening around the case file. Ethan stood on the other side of the car. No one called to him, but everyone was looking at him. Bystanders lingered, whispering, taking photos. A young woman with dyed purple hair was live streaming on TikTok from her car. "See, told you that man is clearly not her dad. This is a broad daylight kidnapping in Wichita. Follow me for updates." But not everyone was chasing the story. A middle-aged woman in business attire walked up to Rachel. "I was sitting at the back table. I saw everything. That man didn't act like the girl's father at all. He pulled her like she was a sack of goods, and she pulled back. That's not how a child acts with family." Rachel nodded, her gaze heavy but resolute. "She signaled to Tommy to take the statement." Lily sat quietly in the back seat of the police car. A small, cream-colored jacket, oversized and swallowing her little frame, had been draped over her shoulders. She stared out through the window. Then the door swung open. No one motioned to her. No one called her name, but Lily stepped out. She walked slowly, each small step across the rough concrete, seemingly guided only by instinct, drawn toward the one person she believed had kept her alive. Ethan didn't move. He didn't open his arms. He only tilted his head slightly when she stopped in front of him. Lily looked up at him, eyes unblinking. "You're my hero." Her voice was soft, trembling but clear. A moment later, Lily threw her arms around Ethan, her short reach circling his waist in a tight embrace. Ethan froze. He had never been hugged like that before. It wasn't polite or formal. It was the kind of hug someone gives when they're holding on for dear life, as if letting go would mean falling back into a bottomless pit. His arms lifted slowly, then rested gently across her back. There was nothing else that needed to be said. From a distance, Margaret stood in the doorway of the diner, arms crossed, her gaze steady. She didn't smile broadly, but her eyes held warmth. She didn't step out or break the moment. She just nodded once, a small nod as if something right had been completed. Rachel walked up to Ethan. "You didn't just save a little girl, Ethan," she said softly. "You reminded the rest of us why we do this job." Ethan didn't answer. He kept looking down at Lily's curly hair, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath against his shirt. Tommy, the young officer, approached. "Sorry for doubting you at first." Ethan looked at him. In those eyes, for the first time in years, there was a kind of unspoken connection, a quiet recognition between a man who had brushed against death and one still learning how to protect life. He nodded. Lily loosened her grip around him. She looked up at him, then turned to Rachel like a bird, realizing it had finally reached the shore. "Where are your parents?" Ethan asked. "My mom's on her way," the girl replied quietly. "Okay, then I'll stay here until she gets here. You're not going anywhere." Ethan looked up at the sky. "Not tonight." The police car lights flashed again as the cruiser carrying Cole pulled away, rolling slowly, sirens silent. But Rachel glanced at her phone and turned to Tommy. "Send a copy of the file to Oklahoma right away. If those two really were waiting for him at the border, we might be able to take down an entire ring." Tommy nodded. His eyes had changed. No more doubt, only resolve. Ethan turned back toward the diner. The lights inside were still on. Margaret was still standing there. He walked slowly toward the door. "Mind if I ask for a fresh cup of coffee?" Ethan asked. "Coffee, gone cold, but I've got ginger tea," Margaret replied, reaching out to open the door. "Sounds better anyway." Margaret placed 2 cookies on the counter. She spoke softly. "They're Lily's. I used to think I shouldn't get involved in strangers' business, but today if I don't speak up, then who will?" Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked out of the window where Lily was being walked to the patrol car by Tommy, still clutching her cream-colored coat. Sometimes a hug is all it takes to change everything. That night the wind still blew cold across the highway, but something had been mended, not with a gun, not with violence, but with the small embrace of a 3-year-old girl, a rare, quiet night. But the truth never ends in a single afternoon. Things were only just beginning. Inside the central police station, fluorescent lights cast a pale glow. Ethan sat alone in the small waiting room, his left hand lightly streaked with blood from a small scrape on his wrist. He stared at it for a moment. He didn't bandage it, didn't complain. To him, real pain didn't live in the flesh. Through the frosted glass, Ethan could see the interrogation room lights still on. Rachel was inside with Tommy and a social worker going over notes about Cole. The door to the temporary medical room opened briefly, then shut again. A female doctor led Lily inside. The girl was still clutching a piece of candy, now melted into a sticky blot inside its foil wrapper. No one had the heart to take it from her. Ethan couldn't hear the voices, but he saw the eyes. The girl wasn't trembling anymore, but her gaze was still the same, lost, weary, like she expected everyone around her might disappear at any moment, including herself. Margaret brought him a cup of coffee. It smelled weak, watered down. She said nothing, just placed it beside him and sat down. For the first time her hands did nothing. They simply rested on her lap. The silence between them felt like its own language. "Rachel says the girl hasn't spoken," she said. Ethan nodded. "And Cole, tight-lipped, but his record's not clean. Accused of abuse before, never convicted." Ethan didn't react. That didn't matter as much anymore. Not now that Lily was here, alive. The waiting room door swung open. Tommy stepped in, followed by a young woman. Her long hair was disheveled, her coat hung open, her face pale like someone who just outrun a storm. Her eyes were red, but there was a strange brightness in them, like someone who had just touched a long-lost piece of their soul. "Grace," Tommy said softly. Ethan stood up. Grace looked around, slightly dazed. Then she stopped when she saw Margaret. The two women recognized each other like people who'd once crossed paths during hard, uncertain days. "Where's the girl?" Grace asked, her voice cracking. Rachel walked over. "In the exam room, she's been checked, no external injuries." But Grace didn't wait. She moved quickly toward the room, her hands trembling. Rachel started to stop her, then just sighed and let her go. The door swung open. Grace stood at the threshold. "Lily, it's Mommy." The little girl sat on a high chair, wearing a coat with sleeves too long for her. She turned when she heard the voice, but she didn't run over, didn't rush into her arms. She just looked. Her eyes were cold, detached, as if she didn't remember. Grace froze, her voice cracked. "Don't you recognize me, sweetheart? It's me, Lily. I'm here now." Lily clutched the stuffed animal tightly. She looked at Grace, then turned her head away. A quiet but unmistakable refusal. In that moment, the embrace never came. Grace stood still, sh.